Today's shir, shame, Margaret Kaplan's sister is slipping bad into a bad state. She had a bit of a good recovery, and now she's back there. So we're just going to do it for Ruth Bat Malka. I'm sorry about this. I hope she actually becomes well. But it's quite a serious thing. So it's not nice to see friends of yours very stressed. Thank you for coming on a Sunday morning. I know, like a lot of you guys, you've got a busy day, but I appreciate it very much. I'm going to just start with the brocha, and I'm having you all in mind. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kiddushanu b'mitzvot v'tzivanu l'asuk b'divrei Torah. Barev Adonai Eloheinu divrei Torah kabafinu v'yimcha beit Yisrael. ונהיה אנחנו וצאצאינו וצאצאיהם בית ישראל כולנו יודעי שמך ולומדי תורתך לשמה. ברוך אתה אדוני המלמד תורה לעמו ישראל. אמן. ברוך אתה אדוני מלך העולם אשר בך בנו מכל עמים ונתן לנו תורתו. ברוך אתה אדוני נותן התורה.
Amen.
All right. I think that the Friday break is good because Friday is quite a hectic day. So actually that Monday to Thursday is great. So just how we ended off last time is we were speaking about there were three different types of damages. And then we finished that. And now the Gemara, we finally hit the fifth daf. So guys, you can be proud of yourself. I didn't think so, but my goal was on Sunday, which is Yom Rishon, to hit the fifth daf. So we had 5A1, which is great. I'm just going to...
Scott.
It wasn't easy.
Talk to everybody. No, it was a tough one, but we got there.
Okay, so guys, we started on the 21st of April. So please God, in a few days' time, this will mean that we've actually done well. Which means that we've stuck at this for 3 weeks, which is quite something. So well done to all of you. And hopefully this week will be less stressful because all the debit orders have gone through. So what I was going to say is the Gemara isn't happy with the Eidim Zomamim story. And I just want to tell you why it's coming back to this. It wasn't entirely happy. Because the Gemara questions Rav Ashaya's omission of some of the cases found in Rav Chia's list. And he said that the payment by Eidim Zomamim, which is compensatory in nature, let Rav Oshia teach it as one of the primary damages. Now, probably you guys should have a bit of a deja vu. You could probably say, well, we've addressed this. So I just want to hit one or two new issues with regard to Eidim Zomamim that the Gemara is bringing forward. And then look at one or two of the previous reasons and see if we can just put this issue to rest finally. So once the Gemara poses this question that why didn't he mention it as a compensatory damage, Rav Ashaya, the Gemara answers Rav Ashaya is actually in accord with Rabbi Akiva, who says that Zomamim, witnesses do not pay on the basis of their own admission. Thus, he deems the payment of Zomamim witnesses a penalty and does not list it. Okay? Let me just explain to you what I actually mean here. So, there are different Tanoim that have got different opinions. So, what happened is, you remember when we dealt with the case of a theft, that if the thieves were managing to escape from the one court and they quickly went to the other court after they were convicted, and they said, we did wrong, we stole, all they had to pay was the actual compensation. There was no penalty by their own admission. So there's two ways you can admit. You can either admit before you get convicted, which the court would prefer, and they make you take a shavua, an oath, or at the point when you're convicted, if you can pull a Houdini and disappear and run to the next court, it's not that you're not going to pay, but you're only going to pay the actual principal amount, which is the compensation of which you stole. So they say, according to this, Rabbi Akiva holds by the same thing, that in fact, that witnesses don't pay by their own admission. Now, this is different from the theft case in one regard, because do you remember that false witnesses, they need a second group of witnesses to say they weren't at that location, so they couldn't possibly have seen the crime that they're accusing this defendant of committing? Because it was a second group of witnesses that caught them out. Gavin asked a question, well, what if the second group of witnesses are corrupt? That's in Makot. Please God, one day we'll do it, because it is part of Nezikin, but not today. So the point of it is, let's just say that the second group, in all intents and purposes, were caught out. They're not going to admit it before the trial, because firstly, they're not on trial. This is one thing you've got to bear in mind. So they're there for one intent purpose, and that is to convict an innocent person. So they generally, it's not a case where they have by their own admission. Sometimes they chicken out. If they're made to make a shavua, an oath, most people will grow a conscience, but these people, maybe they owe a huge favor to the person that's prosecuting this innocent defendant, and they want to pay off their debt. And in that particular way, I mean, it happens with mafia all the time, is that somebody gets into a gambling debt, they get into trouble, and then they pose as a false witness against the person the mafia person is trying to convict, because the mafia person might owe this person money. So if they get rid of their debt, they don't owe this person any money. So sometimes they send innocent people to jail, etc., etc. So the basis here that Rabbi Akiva is talking about is a case where they escaped from the first court and they went to the second court, which is generally the way Edim Zomimim, it's the only way that they probably would escape the case, where they say, listen, we did wrong, we testified against such and such, the court convicted us, but they never passed down sentence. So in this particular case, the Gemara objects to this answer. Bless you.
Thank you, sorry.
It objects to this answer because it's saying, well, Rav Oshia here doesn't teach like Rabbi Akiva in other parts of Bava Kamma in the first daf. So all of a sudden now, Rav Oshia is siding with Rabbi Akiva, that in fact it's a penalty, but in other cases, which we're going to bring now, he doesn't. So, at least why the inconsistency? So before we hit that issue, what we need to hit is the issue of what is Rabbi Akiva talking about. So let's just determine what actually constitutes a penalty. There are three general factors. The one factor is it's a fixed amount. If you look at a case of a seducer or rapist, it's 50 shekels. A defamer where one defames against their wife having committed adultery, that's 100 shekels. 4 or 5-fold penalties, whereby it's the principal amount plus, in the case of a sheep, 3 times the penalty, or in the case of an ox, 4 times. So generally it's a fixed amount. That's what determines a penalty. What determines a compensation is generally when the amount is equal to what you damaged. Does that make sense? It's equal to what you damaged because you're compensating, giving the person back their loss. So if it's a fixed amount, it's a clue that it's a knas. A knas is a penalty. The second clue is if they go to another court, like a thief or Edim Zomimim, they escape the first court, go to the second one, and they no longer have to pay that penalty, and they only have to pay the principal amount. That's a sign that in fact it's a penalty. And the other factor of a penalty that you have to bear in mind is that the court has to convict you. In other words, if you do it by your own admission, you only have to pay the principal amount, the compensatory damage. So this is what the Gemara is talking about with Rav Oshia and Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva is saying the reason I can prove it's a penalty is if the Edim Zomimim, after being convicted, they immediately have a trial for the Edim Zomimim on that same day. And then the person that's being trialed against, that is proved to be innocent, has the case against the Edim Zomimim. So that time period they escaped. And it's also a penalty based on one particular factor. And what is that factor that we said before about Edim Zomimim? We said with Edim Zomimim that they tried to do this to the defendant, but in fact, they were caught out, and the court in this particular case, for example, convicted them. So what they had to pay out superseded what they cost that person. They intended to cost the person money, that innocent defendant, by testifying falsely against him. They intended to get the person lashed, or they intended to get the person the death penalty. And in that case, if during the trial they found out to be Eidim Zomamim, we do to them what they intended to do to that innocent defendant, but they hadn't done it. So it's only compensatory in nature when, as we said before, you do to the other person what is done to you. In other words, you cost him 100 zuz, you have to pay him back 100 zuz. You get where the penalty is coming from. So that's primarily the issue. So according to Rashi, this is the issue about admitting to the crime. Now, one thing I wanted to discuss is what is the problem where Rav Ashaya differs from Rabbi Akiva. So if we have a look, Rabbi Ashaya differs from Rabbi Akiva because remember Rabbi Ashaya had the following thing. He said if a man damages an ox or man damages a man, they're two separate categories because again when man damages man, he's subject not just to nezek, actual damage, like if he damaged an ox, but to, in certain cases, pain, humiliation, medical bills, convalescence, etc. That's when man damages man. And then we said before, why doesn't it mention a difference between when ox damages a man or when ox damages an ox? And Rav Ashaya said because the penalty is the same, you only have to pay nezek, actual damage. Does that make sense? But this is not in accordance to Rabbi Akiva. Because Rabbi Akiva taught them as two separate damages. What does he mean? He's saying that when a ox damages, it's taking here specifically the case of Keren. When a tam ox damages another ox, the tam pays half damages, and he pays from the gufar, from the body of the animal. Is that correct, guys?
Yeah.
Fine. So in that particular case, Rabbi Akiva teaches something different. He says when an ox attacks a man and injures him, he actually pays food damage. In other words, there's no such thing as tam when an ox damages a man. So the Gemara says, well, why didn't Rav Ashaya agree with that? Because Rav Ashaya clearly said something different. I'm not bringing two separate cases of ox damaging an ox or ox damaging a man, only where man damages an ox and man damages a man, because an ox damaging an ox or a man is only responsible for nezek, actual damage. And he said that he agrees with Rabbi Akiva with regard to Eidim Zomamim, that it's a penalty, based on Rabbi Akiva's logic. So he's saying, well, the Gemara is turning around and saying, well, why don't you agree with Rabbi Akiva with regards to the actual issue of the ox damaging a man? And a tam that damages a man is not a tam. You have to pay full damages in terms of the damage it caused the person. So I think it's a good question because what they're trying to do is it's trying to deal with consistency. I don't know if I'm making any sense. They're saying, well, you can't keep picking different people to back. You're going to have to back one person, and then why would you not back him consistently in another case? Okay. Does everybody understand this question? Is there any question, by the way?
No, I'm fine.
I'm good.
Okay. Michael, Kevin?
Yeah.
Okay. So let me just give you the case before I deal with the. I'm going to deal with the answer, but then I'm going to deal with the case just a little bit more in depth. So the reason why it's not a case, according to Rav Oshaya, is that he did blunt his ruling in a certain way. What does it mean, blunt his ruling? It means that you would think that if an ox was treated as muad that damaged a person, because you pay full damages of what you did to the person, that the other stringency would apply. What's the normal stringency of a muad? Or, okay, let's say, what are the two leniencies of a tam? Guys, number one, the leniency is that you pay half damages. And what's the other leniency?
Well, the animal's not put to death either.
Yeah, for damage, yeah, it's not put to death, but what's the other leniency with Tam with regards to
maybe. You don't have to give
Sorry,
it back.
Kev?
With the damages that you pay, you can actually keep it and sell it for your own profit. You don't have to, not maybe?
No, it's a good shot. Do you remember we said we talk about there's two leniencies. The one is the gufa of the animal. I'm hearing a police car.
Yeah, no, that's how I'm putting on mute here. Yeah, there's construction going on.
Sorry. So what we said is there are two limitations to help the person that does tam. You pay half damages, number one, and number two, you pay from the body of the animal, the body, which means if it's a puny little ox,
that's right.
You're not only paying half damages, but as Gavin said last time, and Michael said, is that you're actually paying less than the total amount due. So that's the second leniency. So Rabbi Akiva only blunted the first leniency with regards to tam, meaning that you pay half damages. He says you pay full damages, but you pay from the body of the animal, hagufa. And the reason why he says this is as follows, is it says, let me just see the biblical source. Let me just see if there's the biblical source here. Okay, so it says in Exodus chapter 21, verse 31, that the verse speaks of a law that applies when an ox kills a person by saying to it, the Torah implies the judgment is rendered upon the ox itself. So the thing of it is when we do the kofar payment, by the way, the ox is put to death. And if an ox does kill a person, and the person that has a muad ox, at that case has to pay a kofar payment because he's responsible. So when it refers to that biblical word, it implies the body of the animal. So that's why Rabbi Akiva said that second leniency applies. Now, Rav Oshaya, his list only includes muad damages, by the way. So, for example, if we look at his list, he takes the four in the Mishnah, which he agrees with, and then what of Rav Chia, he takes the other one. Apart from nezek damage, he says pain, healing, convalescing, and humiliation, where humiliation applies. Now, muad, damages to a man are full damages. So in that case, he agrees. But he doesn't list a separate case to Rabbi Akiva, and he goes with the Mishnah because Rabbi Akiva doesn't say that it's always the case where you pay full damages. If the gufa of the animal is tiny and puny, you're not paying full damages. Okay, you're paying more than you would if it was purely a tam, as opposed to treating it that damages a person as muad, but we're still working from the body of the animal. That's why he doesn't work according to Rabbi Akiva on that basis, because he deals with full damages. Okay, and anything that happens to a person is muad, is full damages. So I just want to bring a case that I never discussed before, and that is when an ox actually damages another ox versus a person. By the way, the first case we bought was a case where the second animal didn't sustain the damage. Remember, we said ox A claps ox B, ox A claps person B. But sometimes there's a case where they wound each other. So, for example, one ox starts to charge at the other, and they both come out with damage. So this is how it works. So if, for example, this is in the Bava Kamma 33a. So there are two animals that are in a fight, and the one animal suffers 100 zuz worth of damage, and the other animal is 150 zuz worth of damage. If the animals are muadin, the one that suffered 100 zuz worth of damage pays the other party 50. He pays the difference because both animals were injured. But if one of the animals was tam and it causes the greater amount of damage, the owner must only then pay 25 zuz, which is half the damage. Is that clear? So far, that's very straightforward.
Yeah.
Okay. So what we're saying is here, okay, so for example, in a case where it's generally tam, animals had 100 zuz worth of damage, and the ox had 300 zuz. In that case, he would pay 150. But because the body of the animal of the 100 zuz ox was only worth 100 zuz because it was puny, he only has to pay the 100 zuz, not that extra 50, because it's going on the gufa of the animal. So that's a full example. So what we're saying in the case of, with man, if it cost him 300 zuz worth of medical bills, and that ox was worth 100 zuz that damaged him, he would have to pay the full 300 zuz. But what would happen is it would be limited to this particular case of 100 zuz. Why? Because the body of that animal is only worth 100 zuz. Do you see? So there is a leniency still. Any question, guys?
No, I'm good.
No, I'm good. No.
Okay. All right. Now, so that Eidim Zomimim issue is put to bed. Finally, it's all good. Now, it's going to say, well, then why doesn't Rav Osher list the rapist, seducer, and the slanderer that are monetary in nature? Because, in other words, what they're trying to do is separate the penalty payment from the actual compensatory payment. What's the penalty payment for the rapist and seducer? In that particular case, it's 50 shekels each. For the slanderer, where one slanders their wife of committing adultery, at that point, it's 100 shekels. Okay? So in that case, the penalty Rav Oshaya doesn't discuss, but he does state the compensatory case. If we have a look at a case with regards to the rapist or the seducer, any damage that's caused is paid for. So, for example, the pain is paid for. The medical bills is paid for. The humiliation in both cases is paid for. And the convalescing is paid for. The only case that's not paid for is pain. Because in the case of a seducer, the person basically didn't want to get beaten, and she agreed to submit without her being forced. So in that case, there's no pain to pain. And Rav Oshia already discusses that in the payments where he bought the 5 other damages. Do you remember? So 5 and 4 is 9, plus the 4 custodians, that's 13. So it says any payment that wasn't penalty related, Rav Oshia has already brought up. Okay, so that issue's been put to bed, and that's in Kusuvot for 39 and 40. Okay, let's just go to the next one. We're in 582. Let's see if, okay, now this is an interesting one. It's bringing up with regards to what would seem would be compensatory in nature. So, for example, the three payments that one makes when one contaminates someone's produce with tumah, one who renders somebody's wine nezek, or one basically puts teruma in normal produce. Because again, we said if it's in tumah, the Kohen and most certainly even the Jewish people can't consume food or drink that has it. So that's rendered useless. You have to sell it to a non-Jew. If you put teruma in ordinary produce, you can sell it to a Kohen, but because they didn't have much money and it was a small segment of the population that was interested, you'd have to take a massive reduction in price. And nesech, which was a wine that was lifted up in terms of part of the idol worship practice, you can't benefit from anything for idolatry. So why didn't Rav Osher teach this as a primary damage? Because this is compensatory in nature. In other words, if I cost you a bottle of Shevis Regal, I would have to replace it. Does this seem like a penalty or compensation? Guys?
Compensation.
Exactly. So why doesn't Rav Oshaya mention it? And the reason being is it's quite strange. We're not talking about a case where he knocks over wine, because clearly where he knocks over wine and there's damage, where you have a loss of product, that goes into a normal case of damaging property, which Rav Oshaya mentions. What we're talking here is where there's no discernible damage. It looks the same as before. It's not even a case, for example, where the wine turned to vinegar, where the wine went off, that you put a chemical in and it turned to vinegar, because there it's discernible in taste. Does that make sense? Meaning that you can clearly taste it's not a high quality wine. You can put it on your chips with a bit of salt. That's it for vinegar. It's no longer a Chardonnay, that I can tell you. So that is a distinctive taste difference. But when we're talking about Tumah in terms of a spiritual difference, what discernible difference is there? Again, it's unrecognizable damage. It's listed as unrecognizable because why? No wine was spilt. It looks the same as before, and it tastes the same as before. It's not discernible by palate. So what damage is actually being caused by glance? It's abstract in nature. It's spiritual. You get what I'm saying? So Rav Oshaya doesn't discuss issues about unrecognizable damage. Now, before you say, well, how come he's got all these idiosyncrasies, or how come he's got all these... He's basing on a specific source. In Gittin 53a, the Gemara discusses whether unrecognizable damage is paid for. Okay? And in fact, you could have used one example here to state that concept. But the reason why it brings, Rav Oshai brings three examples is in Gittin 53a, there are three examples brought. In the Chumash, there's generally one example brought. They are listed, but it's listed under one issue. But no matter which one it is, you would still be able to derive the concept. But what Rav Oshai does is unpack Gittin 53a in terms of saying all of these are not discernible damage, because if you have a look at biblical compensation, it has to do with discernible damage. This is basically a rabbinic penalty to be able to compensate the person a loss. And because it's rabbinic in nature, it's considered a penalty, and not biblical in nature, which is considered almost what would be an av, or compensatory in nature. Does that make sense? And the reason why the biblical penalty is there, even though it mimics the compensation of not a fixed amount, is it's trying to dissuade people from ruining each other's product. Does that make sense? So we're going to...
Just repeat that, Dan. Sorry, just repeat that again.
So when it's biblical, no problem. When it's biblical in nature, it's a clear compensation from the Torah. This was rabbinically enacted, where it was a compensation that's listed as rabbinic penalty, even though it is like a compensation in that it mimics the amount. If it's a 300 Rand bottle of scotch, you pay the 300 Rand bottle of scotch. If it's a 100 Rand bottle of wine, you pay it back. But the reason why it's rabbinic in nature, or called a rabbinic penalty as opposed to a biblical compensation, is in the Torah, it doesn't see it as an av because it's called unrecognizable damage.
Okay.
You get what I'm saying? So it is, in fact, compensatory in terms of matching the amount, but it was a penalty by the rabbis just to make sure that people didn't damage each other's stuff. And if you want to say, for example, it's compensatory in nature, well, Rav Oshia and Rav Chia all taught that for damages that you cause to somebody else, like a muad where somebody spits and ruins somebody's dress, you pay for in full either way. So either way, it's covered. So we're going to end on that note. Now, there's something I just want to discuss with some of you guys. Just a second. And that is as follows. Is that I was thinking about this Omer period. And I don't know how many of you struggled to not listen to music for this period of time. Did anybody struggle?
No. But I'm not a big music person anyway, so it's not a big challenge for me.
Okay, so I guess everybody has their struggles, but obviously when for a year, I never listened to any music whatsoever when my mom passed away, not at all, not even in private, etc. And by the time this particular festival come, because I missed music so much, I found it very difficult to keep. So there is an issue in terms of asking halachic shalas that I wanted to go through, you guys, which is very, very handy, and it's something that I wanted you to bear in mind. So what I was going to say to you is the Rambam speaks about this, about an issue of a nazir. So a nazir is somebody that undertakes something like almost an oath to sustain from something. And the reason being is he's got an addiction in a certain arena, and therefore the guy goes almost cold turkey to come to the middle path. The Rambam always suggests the middle path because that's the most balanced sort of lifestyle, unless you're going to become a monk in the Himalayas. But what happens if you have a slight problem within the middle path itself, because either you feel like you're going to crack and you're going to drop everything with regard to that particular halacha, Or the fact of it is you don't like pressure at all, and there's no sort of realistic growth, because the minute that emotional thermostat makes you have that level of self-discipline, it becomes very unpleasant for you. So the Rambam talks about this case of having a happy medium, where you've got to know yourself well. And sometimes when you ask, and I was thinking about this very carefully, sometimes when you ask a Rav an opinion, and he gives you a shala, he doesn't know you that well. And the proof that he doesn't know you that well is we don't know ourselves that well. I don't know if this has ever happened to you, but sometimes I surprise myself because something that I thought wouldn't bug me bugs me, and something that I thought I couldn't handle, you end up handling in terms of a life test. So we don't even know ourselves that well. So when you ask a second party, a shala, they've got to know you very well. But a little tip I can give you is you should ask for a plethora of halachic opinions. Why I'm saying a plethora across the board is you want to know what the medium is and the light and the slightly heavier is and who holds by what. The reason I'm saying this is because you might come to a point where you can't do it anymore and you don't want to break the halacha. So, for example, like during these 3 weeks, you can listen to a cappella music, which is people singing with voices without instruments, for example. It's not ideal at all, but it's something you can do. And it's better than listening to music totally where you're breaking the law. So the more halachically you understand what the range is, the easier it is for you to keep halacha. But the problem is that the Yetzer Hara plays two games with you. Either it wants you to become from within the Baal Shem Tov, where you're going to crack and throw Judaism away completely, and it's going to push you too hard, or you're going to opt for a sedentary and secular lifestyle because you figure, listen, I don't want to push myself too much. It's good that I'm keeping it. And either way, the Yetzer Hara wins. It wins because you never really up your game, number one. And number two, you sometimes up your game too extremely where you throw everything away. So the trick is to know what state of mind you're in, and also how to give yourself, almost like when you're doing gym, additional weight increases to the extent that your body can adjust, or in this case, your soul can adjust. Now, I'm not saying that when you get a plethora of opinions, you need to ask the gay reform rabbi about Temple Shalom. That's what I'm suggesting. But what I'm saying is within orthodoxy constraint, according to the Rambam, you should just have serious consideration in terms of what you can handle and what the capacity is in the range with the plethora of opinions of what you can go to without actually breaking anything, and also to the extent of saying that, can I achieve a little bit more? Can I grow a bit more? And not to stay at this period. I see a lot of Baal Teshuvas that they never increase their learning once they keep observant, and that's their level. And I'm not suggesting you push it to the point where you become Haredi and you become intolerant of everybody else. What I'm saying is slow, steady growth in areas that you struggle with to become at least a normal level of observance, and then at a period where you generally excel and you can handle a bit more pressure, you put pressure on yourself. But I'm just saying, next time you ask an opinion of a Rav, don't let him necessarily give you one opinion, because he might not know you all that well. We always give our best sides to our Rav. I often think if my Rav actually knows what goes through my head, he'd have me locked up. Anyway, just thought I'd share that with you.
I had something about the music.
Yeah, sure.
A friend of mine's dad passed away many years ago, and she used to be a very good singer, and they could classify them as Haredi. Actually live in Israel. They live in Ramat Beit Shemesh.
Okay.
And she was a very talented singer even before she became religious, and then she adapted that to her from life, and she sang in all-woman choirs. But singing and music was so important that she actually got a heter during the Avelis that she could listen to music sometimes. The Rav understood her because they were close to Rabbi Avach, and he gave a heter. So it depends on the situation how well the Rav knows you.
Exactly.
So,
but if you get a hectare, whatever it's called, I'm not good at pronouncing it, then you're covered. Then
yes.
It's okay.
Yeah.
Yes, and that's exactly
as long as a Rav on this earth, an intelligent Rav that you ask, if you go to somebody who's decent, knows what they're doing, and you get a hectare to waive a certain restriction, then you're covered, because Hashem's representative in this world are the rabbis, are the rabbanim.
Yeah. What I'm saying is, in addition to that, Gav, I completely agree, is that you've got to know at what point you're going to crack. But you can't let the Yetzer Hara get you where you opt for too much of a sedentary lifestyle. It's a balance. And you can't push yourself in heaviness. Just like in gym, you can't suddenly bench press like an ant with 3 times its body weight. It's gradual, consistent improvements all the time. And I think that way it doesn't kick up the Yetzer Hara. It doesn't allow the Yetzer Hara to win, and it doesn't allow you to crack. And I do think that you just got to look at the rationale in terms of why one's doing it. So you're completely right, guys. I don't know. Michael, Arthur, do you have a thought?
Cool.
I agree with you. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the difficulty is, it's always self-managing because, it's difficult to know either of those two extremes properly. You know what I'm trying to say?
It's very difficult. It's very, very difficult. And it depends on a lot. Arthur and I were speaking last night that some of levels of tolerance tend to waver when you've had very little sleep. You don't feel well. You've got financial concerns. You've got family concerns. The more stressed you are, the more you're teetering on a knife edge of insanity. And when things are going well, you can handle a lot more. But that's why I'm suggesting exactly that, getting a variety of opinions, but also just trying to grow within the tolerance levels that you can. That is not going to allow you to crack. So, for example, even